In today's episode, I'm sharing a conversation I had with Ray Jones, Emeritus Professor of Social Work at the Kingston and St George's University, ex-Social Services Director and social worker. You will hear us discuss stereotypes which attach to safeguarding professionals, how leaders and how the media responds when there's been a tragedy, and what each of us can do to improve balance in reporting. Hello, Ray. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, and a joy to be here, I hope.
Thank you, Ray. Could we start our conversation by talking about the role of the stereotype of safeguarding professionals and the impact that it has when everybody hears about one of these big stories or a tragedy?
Well, there does seem to be something about pecking order, and often it's the social workers who are put out front to both be primarily in the frame for comments that are made, but also when they're in that frame to be the target of attack and abuse as well. And I do wonder why that is so. And often social workers are only one of one type of professional involved with a family. Often the police have been involved, health professionals involved, maybe education professionals involved, but the others seem to be able to either be moved to the margins or move themselves to the margins, and it's social workers who are left very much the focus. And I think that does somewhat reflect the status of social workers, and that in its own right may be a consequence of social workers often being beside people who've been marginalised, people who themselves get the brunt of aggressive and somewhat vile media coverage sometimes. And some of that, I think, then rubs off onto social workers themselves as a profession.
And do you think there's so a theory that I formulated, and I haven't tested it anywhere, so I'll test it now, is that maybe we don't know as much about what social workers do as we might have more contact with those other three. So I was thinking of myself when it came to considering doing a law degree, and I remember seeing that one of the routes of professional routes from a law degree was to be a social worker, and I didn't really know what it was. I don't know about that.
Well, the other professionals or workers that we mentioned just now, I was mentioning just now, the police, health workers, education workers, teachers, and they're all involved in what might be called universal provision. Everyone has contact with them. Everyone knows that the police are there within their community doing whatever the police are doing. Everyone will have been to school, hopefully, and everyone will probably have had contact with health professionals of different types, doctors, health visitors, and nurses, and different types of therapists as well. So everyone's got an experience of having had contact with police officers, with teachers, with health workers. They don't necessarily have that experience of having had contact with social workers. We're a profession which comes into play when people are in difficulty, maybe experiencing trauma, maybe major life changes, maybe at risk with some vulnerability. But that's not everyone. So yes, we're unknown to many people until they read about us in the media coverage.
And what we see in the media coverage, it seems to be whatever fits the narrative at the time. So when some other safeguarding professionals have reflected with me about this, it's been that, perhaps health professionals, they seemed quite disposable at one time in the media because, if they weren't vaccinated, we were just going to get rid of them. Or, we had to clap for health professionals, which I know that they found quite uncomfortable. Or, police officers at the time of those WhatsApp messages, they were considered in one way, but then on another occasion in the media, they're heroes, perhaps if a police officer's been injured or killed in service. So there's something about that snapshot as well that it just seems to be whatever suits the narrative at the time.
And it depends which part of the media we're talking about in terms of creating that narrative as well. And
Okay.
every so often I do sample read the Sun and sample read the Mail and the Express and the Telegraph, and I have to say these days as well the Times, and papers which are not naturally in agreement with the views and the values that I hold. And if you look at what happens within that angle within the media, and often professionals of all types, workers of all types, are being harangued and criticised and indeed vilified. So I think in relation to particularly those working in the public sector professionals get a rough time in terms of how parts of the media, the right-wing media, choose to present those workers. And social workers are part of that, but police officers get a rough time as well, quite often, as do doctors even, and teachers certainly. So I think we have to be careful about not being too overly sensitive about the negative coverage we get as social workers. On the other hand, I do think that we're a easy and useful scapegoat that's been built up and created as a shorthand for somebody's got to be to blame, somebody's got to be accountable. Right, people know social workers are seen as weak, failing, whatever. Let's target the social workers again, because that's the story that's been created already.
It's headline worthy, isn't it? Okay, so let's think about, if we may, what happens post tragedy. And it seems to me the way the organisational leaders respond has a huge impact on what happens next, whether that be on the workforce or what happens in the review. That top-down message, there's quite a range of ways of dealing with that, aren't there?
Well, I think this is absolutely crucial, and it's absolutely crucial for the future, because it helps determine whether, to be honest, you want to work within those organisations, within those services, within those agencies. If you feel that all the blame is going to be piled in on you, including from within your organisation, and you're going to be hung out to dry, then to be honest, it's not somewhere that I would want to work, and it's not somewhere that other people want to work. And that's why I think some services, some organisations have much more difficulty in retaining staff and indeed recruiting staff than others do. And one of the things, I was a social services director for 14 years, and I've got over 50 years experience now of being a professional social worker. And one of the things that I had learned both by experiences that I'd had, but also, to be honest, in terms of how I recognised that I needed to behave, was that when something awful happens, it doesn't mean that something necessarily has gone wrong in the sense that someone's made a mistake. Something awful has happened because somebody somewhere has chosen to behave in a certain way, which me may never have been able to predict and never would have seen happening. And particularly because we're often handling and having to take decisions within our work with incomplete information, under pressure, rushing around, indeed trying to close work down to take new work on. Sometimes we don't have the time to find out as much as definitely will be known once there's a serious case review, and that drilling down in detail on one particular family, one particular child, after it is already known with the benefit of hindsight that something terrible will happen. So how do you handle that as a senior manager? Well, one of the things that often happens is senior managers seem to feel that they have to distance themselves from their frontline colleagues, because they have to take an independent view at some point in time about the competency of those colleagues in terms of the work that they undertook. So they stay well clear, they lock down the records, call the records in, ready to be trawled over in terms of the review that's about to be undertaken, and they are unseen and distant from their workers until the review is completed. With the workers all the way through feeling, hang on, what's going on here? No one's beside us. They're keeping themselves well clear, keeping themselves well isolated from any blame that might be piled in, as compared to when something awful happens, not assuming that there's been failure, not assuming that there's been some mistake made, but just recognizing that's the world that we operate in. That's the business that we're involved in. Risk is not something that you can always measure and anticipate in terms of how it's going to play out into the future. So another way of handling this as a senior manager is to recognize that. And if you've been a practitioner as a senior manager, you will know that's the experience that you had as well, of uncertainty, of having to make decisions without having complete information, knowing that something awful will still happen somewhere along the line. So as a senior manager, getting out and being beside those workers at that point in time. Yes, calling the records in and making them available for review that will be undertaken, but being beside those workers. And this is how we try to behave as a senior management team where I worked as a director. If something awful happened, for example, an older person wandered away from one of our care homes, older people's homes overnight, was found dead the following morning as a consequence of hypothermia. Someone with a mental illness was discharged from hospital and went on to commit a really serious crime, killed someone. A child is seriously injured that we know. What do? Well, one of the things that we ought to do is to get out and be beside those workers at that point in time. Sit down with them in their team room or in their office or wherever they're based, their service centre. Be drinking a cup of tea or a cup of coffee with them. Show that we are beside them at that point in time. It doesn't stop us. We're still making our judgments later on about how well and people worked. But at that point in time, being beside them is really important, with that understanding that we can't anticipate the future, we can't prevent all awful incidents happening, and that people generally are doing the best that they can.
There's an enormous difference from the point of view of an independent reviewer to walk into the second situation you described in the first, and the quality of the review and the openness to learn will be so different. So yeah, it's really important to hear you speak that way. And one way that this translates when we're in the world of reviews is that I'm really interested in reviews that also learn from strong practice. And I think it can feel it's not very palatable to talk about strong practice when something horrible has happened, something tragic. And we do need to talk about it, and we need to learn from all of the practice. So where can we replicate those things that we did well again? And it's quite hard for people to make that shift because we've been so deficit focused, in my opinion, Ray.
Well, I think we've been two things. I think we've been deficit focused. I also think we've been so, if you like, keen to make change to stop this ever happening again. That political statement that we would have heard from Ed Balls when there was the media coverage following the killing of Peter Connolly, Baby P. And we heard recently from the current Secretary of State for Children that any inkling of harm to a child and the child should be removed from their family while it's being investigated. Those type of statements about it will never happen again and we can stop it from happening again. And means that what we do all the time also is we churn up organizations. Even when things are working pretty well, something awful happens, no one saw it coming, and we think that we've got to make change to stop it happening again. I fear for the review being undertaken at the moment in England that following the terrible killings of Martha Lavinia Hughes and Star Hodgson, exceptional but not unique, but exceptional horrific killings, that will now colour what comes through from the review in England, and will make unstable a system which generally, although now tragically under-resourced, has been working pretty well. And the other thing that we tend to do when something awful happens is that when we have a review, what we know from serious case reviews historically is that they produce about 40 recommendations on average. We've been doing them since 1990, and we've been doing about 150 to 200 a year. So 30 years times 40 recommendations times just 150 reviews adds up to 180,000 recommendations that we've had in England over the last 30 years. And those recommendations are often about similar things, communication, for example. And what we then do is we produce more procedures to try and make sure that we don't fall down on this again somewhere along the line, or that we do it better than we did it before. But what we do is we clog up our organisations, we clog up workers' times, we create what I would call constipated organisations. And without wanting to take the analogy too far, we need to have a bit of a clear out, really, to create that space for workers to do what they need to do, rather than following 40 recommendations times 150 reviews times 30 years, 180,000 recommendations, which have now been built into procedures and actually prevents us from doing the work we want to do.
The spirit of that improvement action could be supportive. It could be creating the conditions for the workforce to do something different next time if necessary. You know, it feels like such a missed opportunity. For me, the review is a powerful opportunity to kind of look at priorities. Do we need to change priorities? And that's why I've been doing it for so long. However, I am concerned in the same way as you are about the clogged up organisation as you speak of it. And I see, there's just missed opportunities to make that learning and improvement action something different.
Well, often, as I say, and I was saying just now, what we do with a serious case review, we drill down in great forensic detail of the records and the work across a whole range of workers from different services and agencies, after we know that something terrible has happened to an adult or a child, with all that benefit of hindsight. And we then forensically interrogate that information to see if everything was done as well as it could have been done. And of course it wasn't, because people didn't have the time to do it in the way they would have wanted to have done it in terms of best practice sometimes. And one of the things that seems to me that we miss out on in terms of reviews is, well, two things. One is actually capturing the experience of the workers who are working with that adult or that child at that point in time within that family or whatever. We don't actually capture their experience. What we do is we capture a record of what they did. And the second thing that we don't do is take into account context. We concentrate on case, but we don't look at the context in which the workers were working, how busy they were, where this piece of work fitted in with all the other bits of work that they were dealing with, how much churn and change there was in their organisation, how much they were being distracted by new colleagues coming, new colleagues going in terms of the people around them. What was their office accommodation like? Did it facilitate them to actually have the time to do the work they need to do? What was the ICT system working like? Did they have reflective supervision? Time to be head up rather than head down? Were they under pressure to close work down to take new work on? All those things about context, where their relationships with workers and other agencies, such that they could trust what other agencies were doing, they knew the workers in the other agencies, they could communicate well with them, or were all the organisations in such a state of turmoil that people were getting on with a task, but not able to do the thinking and not able to work with each other. So we lose that focus on context sometimes when we just drill down on case, and that is a big concern to me, because we don't do the learning then we need to do about what's really important is creating stable, experienced workforce that feel confident in their organisations and that feel confident with each other working across organisational boundaries, and with the time to find out what's happening within communities, what's happening within families. And all of that has been squeezed dramatically over the last 12 years.
I would definitely like to see reviews doing that and asking those questions. So around the time of Baby P, as we all know that case to be called, I don't know how this arose, Ray. I'd love you to tell me, but you did become a support for social workers.
Well, what happened at the time when the Baby P story broke? Remember, Peter Connolly died in August 2007, but you wouldn't have known about that at that point in time. I didn't know about it at that point in time. And a serious case review was launched, and it was going through the processes that we all know when there's been a terrible incident and tragedy in concerning a child. We only got to know about it in November 2008, whatever that is, 15 months, 16 months later, when those three people, Tracy Connolly, her boyfriend Stephen Barker, and the boyfriend's brother Jason Owen, were found guilty of causing or allowing Peter's death. That phrase, causing or allowing, because the police, the Crown Prosecution Service, the courts, the jury could not work out who were those three adults who had inflicted the injuries which led to Peter actually dying. And when that story broke in November 2008, I was a professor of social work at Kingston University and St George's, University of London, a medical school at Tooting. And two or three things meant that I became more active with the media. I'd already been active with the media over many years, even as a director of social services, both locally but also nationally. But when the Baby P story broke, I was available as a professor of social work who'd been a director of social services and was a social worker. So they were able to describe me in those three ways. But I was also not just available, but accessible. I was based at Kingston University. They could get me into London to the Millbank studios within 25, 30 minutes if they sent out a card to me, or if they sent a radio card to Kingston University, they could do it on site in terms of interviews. But the other thing was I was accessible and available because I was a professor, and the university wasn't anxious about what I'd be saying. Indeed, they quite enjoyed the fact they were getting a profile through my title as a professor of social work at Kingston and St George's, whereas if I was a director of children's services at that time, I'm not sure my organisation would have wanted to have been associated with the killing of a child. So I was available, I was accessible, and I was willing to do it, and to be honest, had some experience working with the media. So I became, in one sense, an easy go-to person and was willing to respond. And the reason I was willing to respond was I thought that it was important to get out into the public arena the reality of all professionals who are working with children and families, but also with people with mental illness, other people with vulnerabilities who may be at risk sometimes, about the difficulties and the reality of working in a context where awful things can and do and maybe happen, but working really hard to try and make things better for people, knowing that at some point in time something awful could happen, and that the way it was being played out, you could be the subject of blame, as the Sun described it, for the social workers and their managers involved with Peter Connolly and his family, that they could be seen to have blood on their hands. So I was eager to get out there to tell the realities of the story, and to counter, to be honest, the way the story was being shaped by the media, of turning the attention away from the people who killed Peter to social workers and the managers in particular, and also, in this instance, a GP and a paediatrician. The police stayed right on the margins, because they had worked with the media in advance, particularly with the BBC and Panorama, but also with the Sun newspaper and others, to make sure that what were, I have to say, significant failures in police investigations to previous injuries to Peter and other members of the children in that family, and never got the attention they got, but turned the attention instead on to social workers, which the media were very willing to do.
There's so much that flows from this for me. One thing that flows from it, Ray, is that you are not afraid to say things in really difficult times. In December 2021, after the reporting of the convictions in Starr's case and Arthur's case, there were a few people who, in, for instance, my community on social media, wanted to engage. So it's quite terrifying to say something that may be later taken as a soundbite. So I don't know. Or if somebody said awful things can and do happen, does that sound like we are not honouring the victim, the child, or, you know, if it's in an adult safeguarding a child, are we not honouring what's happened? There is some fear.
I don't think that's, well, it may be an issue. And to be honest, I do get abusive correspondence, I get abusive emails, and at the time when I was making comment in relation to the misshaping of the Baby P story by the Sun newspaper, for example, in particular, there were people who were as vitriolic about me, although less threatening, as they were about the social workers and Sharon Shoesmith. Although I have to say, at that time, I didn't know the social workers. I didn't know Sharon Shoesmith. I thought they had enough on their plates without me making contact with them. So when I was doing a media comment and I wrote the book about the Baby P story, at that point in time, it was only after I had written the book that I had contact with Sharon Shoesmith and the social workers. But more recently, and I've had contact with social workers and managers and others. They've been in the media frame when news stories have broken and been handled in the same way by the media in terms of targeting workers rather than those who'd cause the injuries to children. And one of the things I'm very aware of is, firstly, that people need to be beside other people doing the type of work that we've all done when it gets really tough for them. They deserve that help from us. Secondly, that's not about denying in any way at all, the awful experiences, the horrific events that have been experienced by children and sometimes by adults at the hands of people who've been violent, vindictive, and overly, well, not overly, totally threatening. So I always make the point of how awful it would have been for that child or that adult, how horrific it has been. Yeah. But what I'm also saying is that, but this is what the workers were trying to do in terms of trying to help, work with, if necessary, protect that child. And that's the reality of what the workers were doing. So it's not denying anything about the experience of the child. In fact, I'm about to give you an example, which is an example from 2 days ago. I was in a big shopping centre I saw a man walking towards me holding a child, a baby. Baby was probably only about, it was pre-mobile, so probably about 8-9 months old. And I thought I saw the man, I don't know if the man was the child's father or not, but I think it was now, hit the child across the face when the baby was crying. And I challenged him. I said, have I just seen you slap that baby? And he turned on me and said, what's it got to do with you? And I said, you don't slap babies, do you? And he walked away from me. And I wasn't sure what to do. So I walked away and then suddenly thought, hang on, I need to follow this up. So I went back looking for him and couldn't find him. I wanted to see at a distance how he was reacting. So I wasn't totally sure I'd seen him slap the baby. And then I found 2 police officers and I had a word with them and explained what I'd seen. They said that they would check it out on the CCTV, which they then did. And they rang me back at about 5 hours later on my mobile to say they checked it out. They saw the incident. They don't think it was a slap. It was the father trying to lift the baby higher up into the shoulder. I'm not totally sure about that. But the reason I say that is that, and we do have to confront behaviours that we see sometimes, which are really difficult. Social workers, health officers, paediatricians, police officers, doctors are doing that all the time. But even when that happens, sometimes things will slip past the net, go past us. We don't quite see what has happened, or we don't quite give it the attention that we need to at that point in time. So my comment from that is that we always have to be vigilant, but recognise that sometimes we might miss things. And that's the story that we're trying to get out to the media. We're on the job, we are working hard, we're not ignoring things, but sometimes we don't see what is happening, we don't know what's happening, we can't predict the future, but wherever we are, we're doing the best that we can.
It's important to hear it like that. What is, so let's move to the meat of it, of the conversation, which is the way the media responds. And, you know, what we expect to see in tabloids might be different to what we once called a broadsheet. It's not paper really anymore, is it? And then we might have specialist publications that might relate to one profession. And it seems to me that the range of what you can expect to see is huge. And I wonder what it seems to me there is a role for more specialist journalism in the mainstream media. Now, that's a huge sweeping statement, and I don't understand those organisations. That is just me as an observer seeing all of the coverage. Can you expand on that?
Well, we've lost it, and we've lost that specialisation. Even local papers, the local town evening paper, whatever, used to have, when I say used to have, I'm talking about 30 or plus years ago now probably, specialist reporters who covered education or crime or social services even. And there's been cuts in reporting in terms of staffing of local papers, regional papers, even national media, so that we have moved away in most media outlets now from that level of specialisation. We still find it to some extent with the BBC, within ITN, for example, within some of the broadsheets, the Times, the Guardian. But for most reporters, and if you talk about the tabloids, all reporters, as far as I can see, and will have no particular specialist knowledge at all, apart from their specialist, if you like, skills as reporters writing the type of copy that they write, which varies tremendously between different types of media outlet. So one of the things for us to be thinking about is when we're dealing with someone who's not a specialist, how do we try and get them to understand some of the realities of the work that we're doing and the context in which we're working? So I spend probably more time behind the scenes briefing journalists and speaking to journalists who contact me. And when I say journalists, I'm not just talking about the print press, but I'm talking these days about bloggers. I'm talking these days about 24-hour television news outlets. I'm talking about independent radio as well as the BBC, local radio, regional television, as well as national. So a whole range of, if you like, different types of media. And I probably spend more time behind the scenes talking with reporters of different types about stories, the context in which that may have happened, what workers may or may not have been doing, the legal framework, the realities of the pressure and the implication of the cuts that's been going on. So I have that conversation. And what I'm trying to do all the time is to shape their thinking and to inform their thinking. And often I follow that with an email to them with some, if you like, information about data sets and things like that there, numbers of children in care, how those have increased over the last 20 years and things like that there. And what I'm trying to do is just shape their thinking. And at the end of the day, I know that with some of them, it's not a waste of time, but it will not be reflected in the story. But what I still try to do is to get 2 or 3 bullet points. It's always in my head. No more than 3 or 4 bullet points at most. If I can land 2 or 3, it's a success story in terms of getting it into the coverage somewhere. If I'm doing a radio interview or a television interview, I know that if I get, 90 seconds, that's a lot of time on a television interview. If I get 3 minutes on a radio interview, that is a lot of time. So all I can afford to do is think, whatever I'm asked, answer the question, but also have in mind there's these 3 points, 4 points I want to make, and try and hammer them by repeating them if I can, doing that 90 seconds or that 3 minutes. And at the end of it, if I get 2 or 3 of those landed, that's the best I can do, and that's a success story.
Okay. I didn't appreciate that you did so much of that. It feels to me like we also have a responsibility. So all of us, anybody like me who feels fired up in this way, who feels strongly, who wants to influence the balance out there, may well be telling themselves certain stories that prevent them from doing that. And I know that I certainly was doing that. I know that before I thought, well, I'm an independent reviewer, so if I'm involved in a review and that is reported on in the media, what about if I've said X, Y, and Z before that? And I don't know something's changed in that I'm so passionate that I must say things now. I just want to, if anybody who's listening to this is feeling the same way, what can we say? What do we all do as our own to be a spokesperson?
Well, I think 2 or 3 things. One is, I think it's very difficult if you're the person that, if you like, has been doing a review, or if you're a manager, senior manager, or whatever, involved in a service which has been the subject of that review, to do more than speak from your role at that point in time. It's much more difficult for you to give, if you like, the context and the bigger picture, because what you're seen as being, if you like, is the person who knows about what actually happened here, and you're likely to be in the frame to some extent for interrogation questioning around that. What is quite useful alongside that, or in addition to that, is to have someone available, and to make yourself available and to be made available by others through the media, who's not, if you like, head down, the focus only of this terrible event which has led to this review being undertaken, but who's, if you like, able to give that broader picture, that context, those comments, which set a bigger scene. So one of the things I sometimes offer, but also, and say, don't necessarily use me, but use somebody, is if I was a director of children's services or a chief executive of a health trust or whatever, I might want to suggest to the media, look, in addition to speaking to me, I'm sure that you may want to, you might also want to have a word with A, B, or C, these people, who may be able to give you some more background information about the type of work that we're talking about and the context in which it takes place. And the benefit then is you have someone who can come in and set the scene, which you're probably not being allowed to do as the chief executive or the director of children's services or the local police commander or whatever it might be. So one of the things that we can offer ourselves as, I think, is as those scene setters, the people who give that context. And it may not be, and it shouldn't be, about the work that we are particularly doing at that point in time for ourselves, or where we're, if you like, active. It's giving that bigger picture. So one of the things that I do is, and I just think over the last few weeks, to be honest, and I've been contacted by 2 or 3 different organisations, let's put it that way, where they know that they've got stories coming up which are likely to be of interest to the media. And they've either contacted me or been contacted, had someone else contact me. And one of the things I've done is to give some advice to the people who are known are likely to be involved with the media as, if you like, people being interrogated about what had happened. One of the things I think that we can usefully do and helpfully do is make ourselves available to media, make ourselves known to the media. When I say media, I'm talking about local radio, I'm talking about regional television, I'm talking about, when I say radio and television, the independent channels as well. And a lot of this stuff, remember, takes place locally and regionally. It's not just the national media and news broadcasts and national papers. It's local papers and regional papers and regional media outlets. So make yourselves known to them. Say, look, if you get this type of story and you want some comment on it, and they're often looking for new voices. They are looking for new voices all the time. They have so much space to fill now, especially in terms of radio and television with 24-hour news coverage, etc., and talk radio, etc. They're looking for new voices all the time. You have to help them to find you. So make contact with them and saying, look, this is me, this is my background. And if you get this type of instance coming up and you're reporting on it and you want someone to make comment on it, contact me. And the help about that is that you can make those comments that probably the workers directly involved are not able to make. You can set the scene. You can tell about the impact of cuts. If the workers themselves are doing it, it seems to be an excuse for what's being presented as their failure. But you're presenting the reality of what it's like being a social worker, a health visitor, a doctor, a police officer, a teacher, or whatever it is, in terms of the impact of those cuts. So offer yourself, make yourself known to the media, and then give that context. And you are able to do that in a way that the people who are then being targeted by the media in relation to that particular instance probably aren't able to do and can't do.
That's really useful. Okay, thank you.
And the other thing I'd say is, and just remember, you can't cram a 3-year professional training into a 90-second interview. So you can't, if you like, be too complicated with this. Have 3 simple points that you want to hammer home and try and find the opportunity during your interview, that small period of time that you have to make those 3 points. And if you can do that, you will have got a message out to, well, if it's local radio, 40, 50,000 people. If it's regional television, probably 400, 500,000 people maybe. If it's a local paper, it might be 20, 30,000 people, whatever, but they're still big numbers. If you can get those 2 or 3 points out to that number of people, you've helped to make a difference potentially.
That's so helpful. That's so helpful. So Ray, I have probably asked you everything I intended to. Is there something that flows from this that you would like to add?
Well, it is be active, be proactive. Don't wait for things to happen and then suddenly find that you're on the back foot because you're in the frame. Try and be out there. And sometimes it's difficult to be out there if you're an employee of an organisation, because your organisations may not want to be associated with what are seen as bad news stories, horrific incidents. So sometimes we best do this through being involved with our professional associations, with our trade unions, where we're there as a spokesperson for, in my context, it would be something like the British Association of Social Workers. So you're not necessarily speaking from your organisation as being an employee of a particular service. You're there from the perspective of being able to be badged as being from your professional association or trade union or whatever. And you'll probably not necessarily comment about stories on your patch, because again, your employer might not be comfortable with that. So what you're doing is you're offering yourself as effectively an expert commentator about what's happening slightly further afield. And that, I think, means that you're not vulnerable as an employee in terms of your employer being unhappy, but you're still making a contribution. So yeah, be proactive, make yourself known, and remember, no more than 2 or 3 bullet points. It is worthwhile thinking in terms of working with the media. Keep it simple, keep it clear. Remember, the interviewer probably doesn't know very much about what they're talking about, and the public at large will probably know even less. So don't try and confuse them. Don't try and make it complicated. Simplify it all the time, and nothing more than 2 or 3 messages that you're trying to get through.
That's so helpful.